All right, my friends, I came across this article from The Wired. It's dated 2/4/19, so a few months back. I'm surprised I just found this, but it's amazing. And the article is titled, "The World Might Actually Run Out of People." I find this to be fascinating because overpopulation has always been a cause of the left. Always, always, always have been. And people inherently are bad, according to many on the left side of the political equation, in overpopulation, higher carbon footprints and all this. And I've always found that to be sad, actually. And I'll never forget reading this Wall Street Journal editorial many, many years ago, probably 1993 and 1994. Is very, I think, indicative of the way some view human beings. In fact, I believe this 100%. A pig in Africa is worth more than a human being, is what the editorial was saying, essentially, because basically a pig can provide sustenance for a little bit, where human beings are they just take, they don't produce, they consume, they don't produce. And I'll never forget reading that. I said, man, that is so true. Like, human beings with the brain power that we have, the idea we consume and don't produce, and we consume more than we produce is a fundamental distinction between those on the left, and I'm not even saying those on the right, but just those who believe in humanity. And I find this funny because, Thomas Malthus, Paul Ehrlich, whatever his name is, he and his wife, and we've had so many instances, just so many people who say human beings are the problem to all of our issues. Too many people in China, the one-child policy. And I find that to be frightening, because if human beings are the problem, we're going to go the route of Margaret Sanger, all right? You know her, right? Margaret Sanger. And exterminate them. That make us better off. It's almost the same thing as the broken window theory that many on Keynesians and Paul Krugman and stuff say. The war is essentially a good thing. Now, they don't say that, but the logical conclusion would be that when I break a window, this window here, it creates jobs because I have to hire somebody to fix my window. And thus, if we have a war, we need a Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, which is an economic stimulus. And it's sad because what you're not seeing, the unseen, is that the guy who actually was going to tailor my suit was now not able to be employed because I had to spend my resources on fixing the window. So I'm not growing. I'm actually just keeping up, if even that. And that I'm having misery in the interim because I have a broken window, and all the bugs and all the wind and cold and rain that comes through the window is no longer being kept at bay. And then obviously you make that to war, and war you inherently have broken people, families, lives. It's horrific. Horrific, and that's why I actually don't like the draft. But anyway, let's read this because I think it's pretty interesting. The world might actually run out of people. You know the story. Despite technologies, regulations, and policies to make humanity less of a strain on the earth, people just won't stop reproducing. Humanity less of a strain on the earth. Humanity is good. Human beings actually produce more than they consume. By 2050, there will be 9 billion carbon-burning, plastic-polluting, calorie-consuming people on the planet. By 2100, that number will balloon to 11 billion, pushing society into a Soylent Green scenario. Such dire population predictions aren't the stuff of sci-fi. Those numbers come from one of the most trusted world authorities, the UN. Not for me. But the IPCC, not trusted. And remember who is the guy who's running the IPCC? Is a guy from India. Who's since been, I don't know if he's been arrested, but he lost his job for corruption, all right? And that just is nuts, man. I think is he in jail? Can't remember his name, but he's since been removed from the IPCC. But what if they're wrong? Not like off by a rounding error, but totally, completely goofed. That's the conclusion Canadian journalist John Ibbitson and political scientist Daryl Bricker came to their newest book, Empty Planet, which was due in February. After painstakingly breaking down the numbers for themselves, the pair arrived at a drastically different prediction for the future of the human species. In roughly 3 decades, the global population will begin to decline, they write. Once that decline begins, it will never end. But Empty Planet is not a book about statistics so much as about what's driving the choices people are making during the fastest period of change in human history. I don't know that to be true. But anyway, Ibbotson and Bricker take their readers inside the Indian slums of Delhi and the operating rooms of Sao Paulo to eavesdrop on the conversations young professionals have at dinner parties in Brussels and over drinks at young professionals clubs in Nairobi. The end result is a compelling challenge to the long-entrenched demography dogma, Trojan horsed inside an accessible, vivid portrait of modern families from every walk of life. Wow, that's a long sentence. The authors sat for an interview about how they arrived at the radical new outlook on the human race and implications for future societies. Wired. Now, this is Wired magazine. It's certainly not a well, I don't even know if National Review can be called right-wing anymore, but certainly not a conservative mag. The UN is well-regarded authority on everything from public health to food security and global economics. What made you think they were getting population growth wrong? And one of the authors says, the UN population data is something we all call vertical knowledge, i.e. everybody knows. Whether it's a prime minister of a country, a university academic, a business leader, just a guy on the street, you ask any of them, what is happening with the population? And they go, it's terrible, it's a huge population explosion. I was just watching a movie last night where Earth got so crowded, everybody had to relocate to the moons of Jupiter. It's just deeply embedded. And another guy says, and whenever that happens, you should really go and look hard at the assumptions and then test them yourself. Because most of the time, reality has already moved past where the vertical knowledge resides. I won't say anything about other things you need to test the reality, what's the cliched in the vernacular, but many things in quote-unquote science, if you just dive a little bit deeper, you say, that didn't show what the people who are pushing it said it did. That's interesting, and it makes you start to challenge everything. The red pill, my brothers and sisters, the red pill. So that's what we did. And it didn't take long before we realized there was a whole body of demographers who have been questioning the UN's numbers for years. I think they've just been talking to each other at conferences and through scholarly articles, but they never gotten this information before to the general public. Of course not, because no one allowed them to bring it to the general public, which I would not have if Wired.com didn't write about this. So kudos to Wired.com. That was kind of a starting point. When we just went out and talked to real people in the world about the choices they're making, that's when the statistics were seeming to come to life. Now, again, that's the thing about human beings and why top-down socialistic behavior will never work, command and control. Economies are not structured from the top. Economies are structured from the bottom. The millions of individual decisions each person makes over his life, and millions and billions each day. Should I drink this extra cup of coffee? If I do, what are the ramifications of having to buy more? Should I buy a iPhone instead of what's the other one? Samsung, I guess. I mean, these millions of individual choices, the decisions. This is why libertarianism is so wonderful, because you recognize human beings are always making decisions what they think is in their best service. Whether or not you think it's right or not, it doesn't matter. It's not up to you to determine what that guy says. It's up to that guy to determine what he does. It's up to that guy to determine what's best in his interest, even if you find it to be irrational. And so for a command control economy from the top down, you are inherently limiting choices. There's no other way around that. And when you limit choices, inherently bad things happen. That's just all there is to it. Human beings engaging in what they feel is their best course of action, time and time, thousands of decisions each day. That can't be stopped. It can't be controlled. It cannot be. It can only be, in my opinion, let loose to create wonderful, wonderful things of human interaction, human intelligence, using our God-given brains to just generate change that's the positive. Of course, there's always human beings acting crazy. We get that. But human beings as a whole have advanced so much over the last couple hundred years, and really is due to the Industrial Revolution, and I would say free market economy, getting rid of mercantilism from the old English or European days of the 15, 16, 1700s, and getting rid of and going to a more laissez-faire, for sure. I wish we could go more, but we go, of course, as we advance, we take one step backwards, we advance 2 steps, take 1 step backwards, but we are living just halcyon days, my friends. It's nuts the level of affluence the world has relative to anything has ever been. You traveled all over the globe to interview people for this book. What's one image or conversation that really made the statistics jump off the page? There was a moment when we were sitting in this little school I guess in India, I think. I don't even know how to say that. Listening to a focus group of 13 to 14 women who lived there. And I kept seeing this faint glow light up under the saris. I didn't know what it was. And then I saw one woman reach in and pull out a smartphone, look at it, and put it back. And I realized, here we are in a slum in Delhi, And all these women have smartphones. Who can read? Who have data packages? And I was thinking they have all of human knowledge in their hands right now. All of human knowledge in their hands, even the slums of Delhi. Well, what is it? So the UN forecasting model inputs three things: fertility rates, migration rates, and death rates. It doesn't take into account the expansion of education for females or the speed of urbanization. The UN says they're already baked to the numbers, but when I went in and interviewed the demographer, Wolfgang Lutz in Vienna, which is one of the first things we did, he walked me through his projections. And I walked out of the room gobsmacked. All he was doing was adding one new variable to the forecast: the level of improvement in female education. And he comes up with a much lower number for global population in 2100, somewhere between 8 billion and 9 billion. Lutz has this saying that the most important reproductive organ for human beings is your mind. Yeah, the demographer Wolfgang Lutz. The most important reproductive organ for human beings is your mind. That if you somehow change how someone thinks about reproduction, you change everything. And based on his analysis, the single biggest effect on the fertility of the education is the education of women. The UN has a grim view of Africa. It doesn't predict much change in terms of fertility over the first quarter of the century, but large parts of Africa are urbanizing at 2 times the rate of the global average. If you go to Kenya today, women have the same elementary education levels as men. As many girls as boys are sitting for graduation exams. So we're not prepared to predict that Africa will stagnate into rural poverty for the rest of the century. In fact, it's interesting. Do you know that way more women are in college than men now? I think it's like 55, 45 or something like that. Yeah, interesting, huh? And that's in America. So just FYI, way more women get college degrees than men. That is just a fact. And that has its own issues for demography and whatnot. It's societal issues that could create some chaos. But in of itself, the facts are when more women get more educated, the less children they have. It's just all there is to it. And this is what these guys say. And that's just one cultural variable. So you can say that the old models always worked in the past, but what if the past is not prologue? Where does that remind me of? Oh, it reminds me of me using Monte Carlo scenarios. What if the past is not prologue to the future? And I always use that as a way to defend yourself against low returns going forward, because we always say 10% or Dave Ramsey, heaven forbid, 12%. Can't do that. But but what if we say, look, those numbers of the past have nothing to do with the future? I don't know. I just don't know when it comes to investment returns. So you just always have to be, what if we're wrong? And this is what we're doing here. What if the past is not a prologue to the future? What if we're moving in a different cultural moment? What if it's accelerating? And what if the cultural moment is really about the personal decisions women make about their lives? We polled 26 countries asking women how many kids they want. And no matter where you go, the answer tends to be around 2. The external forces that used to dictate people having bigger families are disappearing everywhere. And that's happening fastest in the developing countries. Now this, my friends, is critical. In the Philippines, fertility rates have dropped from 3.7 to 2.7% from 2003 to 2018. That's a whole kid in 15 years. In the U.S., that change happened from 1800 to the end of the baby boom. It took 200 years for the U.S., the average fertility rate to drop by 1 full child. In the Philippines, it happened over the last 15. So that's a scenario we're asking people to contemplate. So Wired says, okay, but so what though? What does it matter who's right or wrong? And the author says, a lot of people who are thinking about the future of the world, the future economy, the future of city planning, they're basing their projections on the future size of the human population. And people are actually making decisions based on this. If you dig in and see that there isn't going to be a lot of growth of young people coming to the population, a lot of growth is actually going to come from older people hanging around longer because we're getting better at keeping them alive. How does that affect transit decisions in New York City, or how governments to support rural communities that are collapsing at an enormous rate right now? All those decisions are based on having a correct understanding of what our future will look like in the future. I tell you, I find that... See, I've always loved I've always been interested in demographics, population growth. The idea that, for instance, that the sub-Saharan Africa is going to have 8,000 billion people that can't be fed. Again, going back to the Wall Street Journal article where a pig is worth more than a human being. It's the funny thing about that is, and this is actually, I'll just share with a story. When I got out of the Army, I thought about going to ROTC to become an officer. And I'll never forget, I talked to this guy, a good friend of mine. I think he was in my National Guard unit who was doing it. He just told me, he goes, the hardest thing about becoming an officer is that you learn not to look at your soldiers as individuals, but as a unit, and you place them like, pawns on a chessboard. He goes, so you can't have you can have relations, but you just can't look at, there's Josh Scanlon, Corporal Scanlon, or there's Private Joe Snuffy, and I'm going to put him to the line of battle. You can't. You got to look at it as I'm putting this unit, this squad, this team, this platoon. You can't. That's how you look at it. No individuals. And I'll never forget that, because I always thought, isn't that interesting? Because when you take away the individuality, that human beings become just a statistic on a spreadsheet. And it's like Stalin. They attribute this to Stalin. In order to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs, and some eggs are individual human beings. It's you sitting there feeding your cat right now. It's you sitting there delivering newspapers on an early Monday morning. It's you sitting there rocking your baby to sleep. That's the individual eggs that you got to break to make the omelet. And I always thought that, and I always find it, that when you take away the humanity of human beings, because that's what we are, humanity, each individual, and you just focus on as a whole, the big picture, you lose humanity, and then you start separating yourselves from the day-to-day lives that people are living, and then you become like Margaret Sanger. You become someone who says it's okay to sterilize people of a sub-inferior group, and we know the evil that she promoted. And you say that, well, I'm doing it to benefit humanity at the expense of the individuals who are human. That doesn't, it just inherently is bad. And as someone who is a Christian, you can't have that. You just can't. You got to say, no. Again, if God died, God sent his son to die for each and every one of us. He didn't send his son to die for humanity. He sent his son to die for you and me and that guy, regardless of what you're thinking about that guy. And again, going back to C.S. Lewis' book where he talks about going to church and seeing your next door neighbor, and you know all his sins. You're like, man, I'm in church with this guy. This guy's bad. At least I'm not as bad as him. And then pride starts setting in. And you say, I don't want to be associated with these guys. These guys are peons or idiots or something like that. And it's hard not to look at humanity as one big thing as opposed to made up of millions and billions of individuals. And when you do, and you start saying, I don't want those people moving next to me. Those people are, they're going to take on me. They're taking from me, as opposed to those people can add to the pie and expand it. The pie is expanding under capitalism, my friends. The pie doesn't expand under socialism. That's all there is to it, which is why I'm a capitalist and not a corporatist, as we see in the modern day Republican Party. The National Review Republican Party. I'm a capitalist in the libertarian sense that you live your life, I live my life, and we'll combine together and live both. We'll improve each other's lives together by engaging in fair trade, by engaging in volunteer activity with each other. I just wish more people would do that. But you start by recognizing humanity is comprised of individual human beings. I thought you'd find this of interest, and maybe we'll give you some hope that if you're worried about overpopulation, China engaging in one child and saying China's booming, well, it's not. I mean, there's going to be a decline simply because they did not allow for women to have children. In fact, we know for a fact in China that when women were having girls, that was not looked at kindly because girls consume, right? How they consume by creating more children, and they can't have that. And so China is on the downside, without question. Europe's on the downside because they're not having children, without question. And the savior isn't migration from these third world countries, because they are also having less and less children as well. So anyway, it's going to be an interesting dynamic. The younger population is shrinking, the older population is growing. Japan is the model. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. So anyway, I thought you'd find interest in this. We'll see you next time.